Welcome to Meliora's channel, your go-to place for C# and data analysis tutorials, products hands-on demos, and insider secrets to keep you at the cutting edge of innovation. Our goal is to break down complex tech topics to a level that you will easily understand to supercharge your skills. Without further ado, let's jump right in.
Welcome to the second part in the SQL series. So in the first part, we've successfully installed the MySQL server, and we also utilized the MySQL workbench to create a database. In this part, we're going to learn about tables. So tables are structured data made up of rows and columns. The rows go across like this, often called observations, and the columns go down this way, often called attributes. So one thing to note, especially when you are going to be working with databases and tables, is the primary key. So this is the unique identifier for each row in a table. So it's a call. So it's usually something like ID or something of the sort. But each row has a unique primary key in the column for the primary keys. So no two rows can have the same primary key. And the primary key is not nullable. It cannot be null. You can't leave it blank for each record in the table. All of them have to have a primary key. So we're going to utilize our data definition languages of the SQL statements, and we are now going to go ahead and create a table, learn how to insert values into that table, how to drop, truncate tables, and also very basic query operations for tables. Okay, so we'll go ahead and open up the MySQL workbench, and we're just going to log into our uh, server using the password we created at installation. If you remember, click OK. And this will now log us into our MySQL server. And here we can see the Meliora DB database that we created in the introductory lecture. And if we click on the small arrow down, we can see we have tables, views, stored procedures, and functions. So today we're going to be focusing on tables. Okay, before we do anything, we're going to want to do a use statement. So use Meliora DB. So this is just to tell MySQL that this is the database we're going to be using and we're going to be creating the table for. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on execute. And now you can see that that's highlighted the Meliora DB in bold. Okay, so now let's just go ahead and clean that off, and now we are going to create a table. So the syntax for creating a table in SQL is you write create table and then you give a name for the table. In this case, let's just call this a test. And after you give the name of the table, in brackets, you're going to now define the column names as well as their data types. So let's say test, let's go test underscore ID. Let this be an integer and let's make this the primary key of the table. That just means that that's not nullable, so we always have to have something in there with along with a record. So any record we add to the table has to come along with that primary key. And let's just write under test underscore name, and let this is going to be a variable character. So text, and let's make it that 55 characters long. Okay, and then we're going to add our semicolon at the end to end the SQL statement. Okay, so we expect to see a table called test created in the Meliora DB tables. We expect to see two columns, which are test ID and test name. And then test ID is going to be an integer and it's the primary key of the table. And then test name is going to be text, which the limit is 55 characters long. Okay, let's go ahead and click execute. And that has now created the table. And again, if you don't see the table, like the first part, you're just going to go ahead and refresh. And now we can see the little arrow here. And if we click down, we can now see the table called test. Now, let us go ahead and describe the test table. um so we can now see exactly what fields, their types, and whether they are nullable, and then whether it's the primary key or not, and the defaults. So we can see, yes, we successfully created the test ID, test name, and the test ID is of type int, no null values allowed, it's the primary key. And then we now have test name, which is of type text varchar with 55 characters maximum, and then it is nullable. Okay, well done. So that is how to create a table. And we can see that when we create it, we now have the columns, indexes, foreign keys, and then triggers for all that. We're going to discuss these later. For now, we have now used the create clause to create that table. Let's now see how we can remove this table from the database if we no longer want it there. So we're now going to simply use drop table test. That is how simple it is to drop a table. Let's run that. You can see it's gone. So that is how simple it is to drop a table, and also how simple it is to drop a database. If you remember the first part, we just wrote create database and the name of the database. Dropping a database is equally as easy, where you just write drop database. So let me just show you that again. So if I write create a database, and let's call this database drop me now, something of the sort. And if we execute, then we have now successfully created that database. Okay, so let's refresh, and now we have drop me now. And you can see the Meliora is in bold again because we're currently using this database for table. So any tables or anything we'll create will be affected here. But now you can see we've now created the drop me now, again, the database. And very simply, all you need to do is just, instead of create, you write drop, and then if you execute that, that whole database is gone. Which is why you must be very, very careful with your drop statements, because just that whole thing, like you saw with the table, and you can see it's same with the database, and it's all gone with whatever information it may have carried. So you just want to be careful. Anyway, so we've created the table test, we've dropped the table. Now let's create a table and insert something inside. So let's say create table. Let's create the test table again. This time around, we're going to have the test underscore ID. Again, it's going to be an int, and it's going to be the primary key of the table. And then we're now going to also have test name, which is going to be a varchar, which is again 55 characters. Okay, so let's create that table again. Now we have test again. Now let us go ahead and use another function called the insert. So this is the clause. This is the statement that you use when you want to impute values into your table. So we're just going to write insert into test, and we are now going to specify the columns that we want to insert these values into. And we're now going to define the values. So let's insert 10, and we're going to use the quotes because we're going to test name is a varchar. So let's say test, let's say drop in table. Okay, and again we end with a semicolon. So we're inserting into table these columns here, test ID and test underscore name. And the values we're inserting into test ID is 10, and then we're inserting drop-in table into test name. Okay, so let's go ahead and run that. And we can see now we have one row affected. Let's refresh. And now we're just going to use a select query to check if that has taken. We're just going to simply select all from test. And if we execute that, now we see that we indeed have 10 in the test ID, and then testing name is dropping table. Okay. Now, if we want to remove all the values that we've put in here without deleting the table, the function or the statement for that is, the command for that is truncate. So if I write truncate, um, test to truncate the test table, at the end of that, let's also write the select all query again, just so that after I truncate the table, then we'll just select all from the table again. What we should see is that these values should now be gone after running these two. So let's go ahead and execute. And we can now see now we're getting null and null. So truncate table is used to delete all the rows from the table without actually deleting the table. Okay. Okay. Now, we've just done a basic table, so it's only 2 columns here with a very basic insert. So let's go ahead and now drop this table, and let's create the table that we are going to use for the remainder of the course. So we are going to use a table, the Excel file that details the structure of what we're going to be, well, the CSV file is linked in the description and the resources. And we are going to create each column according to that file. Okay. So I think I'll just flash the image of the CSV opened in Excel somewhere on the screen so you can see it. But let's go ahead and create our table. We're going to call it employee data. And then in the quotes, we're going to now begin writing our columns and the data types. So this is going to be the primary key. We're also going to have first name. That's also going to be a variable character. Let's say 255. We're going to have last name. That's also going to be a variable character. So and then we are going to have the dates of birth, which is a date. We're going to have the department code, which is an integer, and we're going to have the sex of the worker, which is a character, and then we're going to have the salary, which is going to be a decimal. Okay, so just to go over, we're going to create a table. It's going to be employee data. We're going to have the ID column, which is a primary key, so and it's of the variable character type. We're going to have a first name, which is also a variable character, the last name of the employee, which is the variable character, 255 characters. We're going to have their date of birth, which is a date, the department code of the employee, which is an int. We're going to have the employee sex, either male or female. So we're using a single character for that, so either F or M. And we're going to have the salary, which is going to be a decimal. So let's go ahead and execute and refresh here to now see that table. So let's now go ahead and describe that table. And yeah, so this is exactly what we wanted. We have our ID, it's not null, it's primary key, first name, last name, DOB, deb code, the sex of the person, and then the salary. You can see character is just a single one, so that's what we have. Okay. And now let's go ahead and select all from that table. And we can see that we have null for everything because it's still an empty table. Okay, well done. Now let's in the beginning we only saw how to insert into a table that had only two columns. Let's go ahead and insert into this table that has a lot more columns. Keeping in mind, let's go ahead and use the describe again. When you are writing your inputs for your insert, you always want to keep in mind the data types and their restrictions. So now insert into employee underscore data, and we're now going to write out all these. Okay, and then we're now going to write values, and we're now going to begin the values that we want. So the ID is variable, so we're going to put it in quotes. Let's say something like AB 005, comma. Now we're going to insert, and notice that it the way it goes, it's that this the way we've listed out the columns here is where we want to impute the values here, because that's how it's going to insert it into the table. So AB 005 going to ID, the next one we type go into first name, and so on. So let's say the first name of this person is let me say Ahmed, and then the last name, let's say Dawa. The date of birth. Now MySQL recognizes dates in the year, month, day format, so that's what we're going to do. April. Okay, and then now we have the department code. So yeah, we are going to see the table for these later, but that's an int, so we can just go ahead and then we're now going to hold on, going to have the text. This is a male, and sorry, that's M. And then the salary, again, this is going to be in numeric value. So let's say maybe this person is earning something like 67 thousand naira a month. And then we'll just close the parentheses and put our semicolon to signify the end of the SQL statement. So we have here insert into employee data, that's this table here, in the columns ID, first name, last name, date of birth, department, sex, and salary, all these values. Okay, and notice the date format again: year, month, day. So this is on 1987 in April, the 1st of April. Okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and execute. And now that we've done that, let's go ahead and select. We should have probably should have written this immediately after, but it's okay. Select all, and this is what we now see. So we have the ID, we put in the first name, which is Ahmed, the last name, which is Dawa, the date of birth, which is 1987 in April 1st, and then the department code, which is 200, the sex, which is M, and then the salary, which is 67,000. Okay, so that's how we can now insert values into the table. Now, I already have a CSV file with values that we're going to use for this table, especially for the following lectures. So now that we've seen how to successfully insert, let's go ahead and truncate this table, the employee data table. You can pause the video now and try and truncate this table. Okay, so if we want to truncate it, we're just going to write the truncate table, and we're just going to write the table name, which is employee underscore data. And then after we're done with the truncation, let's just select everything from that table again, just to know that it's now blank, like that. So let's execute, and that's what we now see. So everything now is blank. So it's completely deleted all the rows of the table, but left the table structure intact. Okay, so now let's load our CSV file into our employee data table that we have now truncated. So just go ahead and download that file, and then we are now going to begin. So we're going to start. You're going to load data in file, and then we're now going to put a path here to our file, the file location, and we're now going to specify into the table that we want this file to be loaded into, which is the employee data table. And then we now want to, because it's a CSV file, we're going to specify that the fields are terminated by commas. Also that the text itself are enclosed by quotes, and that the lines are terminated by \n. So this just means they are terminated by new lines. So if you press enter, every row in the CSV file is stacked underneath the other. Okay, and then we're just going to write, because this file has a header. Okay, so load data local in file, then we just have the path to that particular file, the data practice employee.csv. So we're going to load that into our employee data. The fields are terminated by commas, like CSV file, comma separated, values, and they're enclosed by quotes, and the line is terminated by a new line. And then we're going to ignore one row because that row, we have headers in the CSV file. So let's go ahead and execute. And we can now, after that, let's select all. Just confirm everything went well. And when we do that, we can now see that we've successfully imported our CSV file into our table. Now, if this didn't work for you, you would go to one fix I'd recommend, as those database manage connections. You click on your local instance, you'll go to advanced, and you'll make sure to type this particular line here in others, which is opt underscore local in file equals to 1, which is to allow that. So this should be set to true, should allow that. And then when you've done that, you want to click test connection, and then you're just going to put in your password that you created at the installation, and then you click OK. So if this doesn't work for you, just go ahead and do that. And okay, with that now, we have prepared the table, and in the next lecture, we are now going to start working with our data manipulation language, SQL statements, to now start interacting with the data we've just loaded in this table. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next lecture.
Thank you for watching, and if you learned something new or enjoyed this video, be sure to show us support by clicking like and subscribe. Your support helps us to bring you even better content. So stay tuned for the next exciting video. You can also click the link below to see other free and paid videos on other exciting topics. If the click did not work, kindly copy the link and paste on your browser. Thank you and see you in the next video.